Moving on, away from international conflict to international protest. So, we talk a lot in the Western press about what's going on in Hong Kong these days, but there are other protests that have been going on recently that I heard little murmurings of, but didn't really hear much more than that. So, at the end of September, protests erupted in Egypt against Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, basically over mostly corruption. It appears externally like it's in a large part an extension of the 2011, Arab Spring protests. A number of people who I've read articles of like graffiti artists and things like that would do graffiti art in Egypt during the Arab Spring, but have since become refugees and moved elsewhere and want to lend support to this movement. So a lot of it is against corruption of Sisi, but also it seems in large part reaction to basically the ban on. It's been a 6-year ban on public demonstrations in Egypt as a result of the Arab Spring, because when the masses get together and demand change, what they really want is to be banned from demanding change. Another protest that really caught my eye is much more recent, is what's going on in Israel right now. Or sorry, not Israel, in Iraq right now. So in Iraq, they're protesting. So this is the latest updates from Al Jazeera, which is one of the very, very few outlets that's covering this at all. The security forces have responded to the protests using water cannons, tear gas, live rounds, and rubber bullets. So the other thing that was a development from a few days ago in the protests was that the central government had shut off access to the internet. So images even of the protests were trickling out at a snail's pace. They have not restored access to the internet yet. Most Iraqis have been cut off from the internet and social media for several days now. They talked about that as part of the demands earlier. This is the most recent, though, is that Iraq's parliament has had its first session since the protests began, and are condemning the protests and wanting a return to normalcy, but they are at least receptive to the demands. A lot of the demands of the protesters are around adequate social services, lack of jobs. It's basically, when you hear the protesters say things like the government, which be aware this is a American-backed government. This is basically the USA installed government in Baghdad. So the protesters are saying, look, they seem to constantly be able to build jails and prisons. We need them to build schools. We need them to build hospitals. We need them to build
Paul,
libraries.
Wait, I thought we were talking about Iraq, not America.
Yeah, yeah, right? The universal concern of we would like food and education and social services, and you are imprisoning a lot of us for BS reasons. That's essentially going on in Iraq. That's for almost a full week now of pretty violent protests. Now, the thing that I find really interesting and really telling is this is in the wake of us being told repeatedly that there is this global right-wing shift, right? That there's a global shift toward conservatism and fascism, and it's the rise of all that. And it's like, I see people globally protesting for the things that people protest for or have been protesting for ages. Social services, dignity, quality of life improvements. I don't see ethnocentrism or xenophobia cropping up in these Iraqi protests or in these Egyptian protests. The other thing I found really, really interesting is the protests that we do see nonstop is, those wonderful people in Hong Kong who just want their democracy back. Let's talk about that some more. Oh, these police, they're being so violent. Do you see these smoke canisters?
Do you see that single guy that got shot?
Yeah. These protesters are literally waving around iron rods and throwing Molotov cocktails in Hong Kong. Like the protesters. Can you imagine if in Ferguson there were people throwing Molotov cocktails? Like, America does anti-riot gear protest militant police way better than Hong Kong is doing. And Al Jazeera is reporting that they are using live ammunition on protesters in Iraq. Why are we not hearing about this? Why is it just in Hong Kong? Oh, right. Because they want democracy.
So I think it's always interesting that we go to this point where we were talking a lot about this while we were setting up the show, and it's so fascinating, but it makes complete sense because in this world of ours, everything's done for a reason. The bigger you are, the more established you are, the more predictable you are at the same time. So in China or in Hong Kong, America is adversarial with China right now, and Trump, obviously the Republicans, Trump, or the tariffs and the Trump stuff, and the Democrats, just kowtow and go with that, but they also don't have a big game for opposing it, and it's like freedom, everyone has to go with freedom. So when protests happen in Hong Kong, and the media also likes that because there's a lot of good footage coming out of it. It's live. It goes exactly with what the media likes. So when Hong Kong is protesting, everyone in power gets their way. The media gets footage. They get support from the established governance. The Republicans get something that they want. The Democrats get something that they want. Everyone wins. It's in power. Go to Iraq. If you were to cover these protests, then there's a little inkling of, that kind of is our government. Maybe we're not doing something right. But at the same time, what we've learned in the past is if it's just poor brown people, who cares? These are Hong Kong rich people, richer people, more GDP. But Iraq, we don't even cover the war that happens there because it's just like, it's been going on so long, it's in the background of everyone's mind. In Egypt, again, another U.S.-backed government. It's kind of embarrassing. And again, both cases, Republicans don't get a lot out of it if that's the case because they're trying right now to keep Trump, which we're going to talk in a little bit, to not pull out of Syria. But everywhere we're at, we're failing at what we're doing. And so it's just not in the Democrats' best point of view. They're focusing on trying to impeach Trump, and it doesn't help if you focus on Egypt or Iraq. And again, Republicans, same thing. And then news media, you were talking about a blackout, harder to get footage out, so it's harder to show police doing something. And, news media, it's like how many people can die an hour or how much violence can be perpetrated an hour is your rate and how much your advertisers are willing to pay. So, which is also very ironic to pull it to YouTube because when the TV news covers people getting shot and killed in the streets, people pay more money, advertisers go up and spend more money. But when YouTubers, and I can tell, this video is probably getting restricted a little bit because of the topics we're talking about. So the same thing gets covered by us. We don't even show images, and our viewership goes down. And it's just interesting.
I think a piece of the puzzle, though, that I think you left out, though, or maybe glanced on very briefly, is that Hong Kong and the protest there is a wonderful target for those communists are so terrible, socialism is so bad, isn't capitalism wonderful? And that angle doesn't exist when people are asking for social services in a country that we spent decades bombing, but we're still bombing. And I think that I wanted to bring that around a little bit more is that capitalism nugget, right? That propping up of capitalism, that propaganda, for lack of a better word, reminded me of probably the best thing I saw on Twitter all week, and that is the conversation was on centrism, liberalism, and somebody chimed in and said, I'm European, I'm a European centrist, what does that make me in America? And the response was pretty much Mao.
So I'm going to read this. I think this will be a good way to end this segment, but David Irwin says, we have failed Iraq is not a good headline.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. Well, and we forget also that we spent a lot of time in the bombing of Iraq, bombing those pieces of infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Schools, hospitals, water treatment plants. Those were our targets, not military targets predominantly. Anyway, we need to move on.